Welcome to the Navic Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navic's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navic.co. This episode is brought to you by Zebedee, which welcomes you to a new era of monetization and user retention. Zebedee provides a plug-and-play API and SDK for seamless integration of instant, borderless, and low-fee payments using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. With fees less than 1 cent, Zebedee powers over 4,000 developers across sectors, processing millions of transactions monthly. You too can unlock the potential of borderless transactions to better engage and monetize your global user base, including the unbanked, and simplify the way you handle payments. Start for free at Zebedee.io, integrate with just a few steps, and monetize your experiences. Again, that's Zebedee.io, or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Navic Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Takei, and you know it, this is Interview and Insights. As always, I've got an exciting topic for all of you listeners today, trigger buzzword, AI. We know that everyone and their mother are talking about the use cases of AI and the billions of dollars that have flooded the AI ecosystem. In gaming specifically, startups looking to bring AI to gaming across a myriad of categories have closed over $700 million in disclosed funding since 2022. In terms of funding categories, they are broadly broken down into 5 things. 1, efficiency tools for creators. 2, enabling new patterns of play. 3, AI-enabled game developers. 4, moderation. And 5, other. The biggest of these categories is efficiency tools for creators at $272 million and moderation, the most pecuniary, at $42 million. Within the slice of efficiency tools for creators, there are a few subcomponents such as art generation and animation, videos, game engines, audio, content creator tools, and finally, playtesting and QA, which from the title of our episode, you can probably discern is today's topic. And so today we're going to dive into the use case of AI as involved in the quality assurance stage of production for video games. And to do so, I'm welcoming 2 founders of 2 companies leading innovation in the space. So my first is Christoffer Holmgard, CEO and co-founder of Modal.ai. I'm of course going to have him share how he came to found the company. But for our audience, Modal.ai is a company seeking to redefine game development through 2 products, Modal.test, which is automated game testing, and Modal.play, virtual on-demand players to satiate matchmaking needs. Modal has backers like Griffin Gaming Partners, Rendered VC, and several others. So welcome to the pod, Christoffer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Woo. My second guest is Nathan Martz, CEO and co-founder of Agentic. Agentic, and of course, Nathan will explain more in depth, is building AI players as a service, aka a service that allows developers to quickly train AI that can play and test their games. Agentic is backed by 8VC and others. Welcome to the pod, Nathan.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on. I was really impressed by the demo that you guys showed at the 8VC GDC event. So I was like, I gotta get these 2 guys together.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So before we get started on all things QA and AI, I gave you guys some brief intros, but I would want to hear and have you tell the audience a little bit more about you and why you founded your respective companies, and specifically what inspired the names behind your company. Christoffer, how about you go first?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Happy to. So we started Modal.ai in 2018. Ahead of that time, I myself, I've been in games since around 2008 professionally. So been doing that for quite a while. And then I've been doing work in AI and machine learning for games since 2011. And what we do in Modal.ai is really just, bringing those 2 things together, as it were, and trying to help as many game developers with that as we can. Why we decided to found the company? There's a multitude of reasons for that, but the things that we're trying to address and help folks with in Modal.ai are things that we as the founders of the company have faced ourselves when we were building games. think one piece of original trauma for me was when I had a game crash on live national television, one of the first ones that I did. So that definitely taught me a lot about the value of good testing and QA. But more generally, I think when we started Modal.AI in 2018, we were kind of like seeing that there were a lot of strides were being made in what could be done with game playing AI, and some of it was in the service of just advancing AI in general. And I think we're seeing some of the benefits of it, writ large now. But because we came out of the space, we thought, well, somebody should really try and work on getting it out to as many people as possible and help them reap the benefits of this technology. That's why we started the company. And as for the name, well, at the end of the day, what we do at Modal, we model what players might do in your game. We build models, and we do it using AI. It's as simple as that.
Awesome. But you model them without Excel, I'm sure. So you remove the E from model, from the finance word.
that's why it had to go. That's
death to Excel. That's a newbie's modeler space. I'm sure yours are much more sophisticated.
I love Excel and Google Sheets. Just
okay, very cool. I love that journey. And thank you for sharing a little bit about the name. I think that's always so super interesting, especially in the it usually has a lot of meanings to the founders that found the company. Nathan, what about you?
So I, like Christoffer, started out as a game developer. In my case, in the early 2000s, I was a game dev for about 14 years at LucasArts and Double Fine. And then eventually went to Google, was there for 7 years. I led developer products for AR and VR and some machine learning work. And, actually I started my career as a tech artist, building like tools and pipelines. And I think in many respects, the through line of my career has been creating technology that empowers, it helps out creative professionals, right? That's what I love most, is to build a technology that lets humans do what they're best at. And often that you do that by getting rid of like the busy work, the stuff that's tedious, time consuming, so that humans can focus on really being, creative and expressive. And so, during the time at Google, I started to see, there's this intersection, this confluence of, AI and game development. There might be ways to apply that really helps game developers in a new kind of way. So I met my now co-founders, Stuart and Leo, while we were at Google. And in 2021, we left to found Agentic, the focus of which is to create a service that allows game developers to train AI that can act like players of their game. Very at a high level, very similar to what Christoffer outlined. Sometimes you want players for QA. Sometimes you want them to validate your infrastructure. Sometimes you want them actually in your live service to be, non-toxic teammates or to keep liquidity in your matchmaking pool. But all of that was our thesis. And the thing that we wanted to do most of all was to develop technology in a way that it was, AI in service of game developers. It was thoughtful about the way that game developers work, their like very pragmatic constraints, their goals, and to make sure that everything that we built, from the algorithms to the infrastructure to the developer experience, really made sense when your day job is making a game, not working towards AGI. As far as the company name goes, we had our main goal was we wanted something that was fun, that was a bit playful, that was suggestive of the work that we were doing. With AI, I think it's very, very easy to have a name that's kind of dystopian, right? A lot of kind of sci-fi AI references, are like not awesome. And then also, I personally, in one area I'm superstitious is I think you have to be very careful about your like company name. Don't tempt fate. If you have something that's like Jinx, like, why do we have all this bad luck? So we wanted something that was, very like cool, positive, good vibes. And when we looked around, we came across this word agentic, which is really about acting with agency, acting in a way that is goal seeking, where everything you do is designed to achieve a positive outcome. And it's like, oh, that's cool. That's like kind of what the company is about. That's kind of what the tool does. And then it's actually been a pleasant surprise that in the last, year or two, the word agentic has become actually kind of part of the larger generative AI conversation. So yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. No, it totally has. And that's actually why I was wondering whether or not that informed the name, but it sounded like the root of it came from something else. And it's just kind of coincidental that...
yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, it has agent in the name, right? So that's kind of nice. But also, agentic comes from like CogSci. It, predates, LLMs and our company. And we just... oh yeah, this is a nice. It's an easy to say word. It's memorable, and then it sort of is evocative of the space that we're in.
That's awesome. Well, thanks, guys. That it gives some good grounding for what your companies do, who you guys are. And before we go down, though, the AI buzzword wormhole and talk about a lot of things that you guys mentioned, the different types of testing formats and how could improve QA through the use of AI. I want to talk a little bit about the QA function in games, its purpose and its history, and how QA needs evolve over the life cycle of a game from pre-production to production to alpha to beta to ship. And one of the things I want to make clear before we even open this discussion is that QA is often a disenfranchised discipline in games. I'm sure we've all seen Mythic Quest on Apple TV, but to some extent, QA departments in games have been where people begin their careers and rise through the ranks to become some of the most famous game directors and senior game leaders of all time. But it is kind of that like mailroom equivalent in Hollywood. And another debunking that I'd like to share is that QA people sit around playing games all day, which is not true. It's not monotonous. And in reality, QA can actually be at times a creative and technical function. So I want to set that tone today that although we're going to talk about how AI can enhance and lighten QA demands for a game, we're obviously in no way diminishing its functional importance. So Nathan, you're up first. I would love for you to tell me a little bit about what QA is in games, why QA is important to games, and what are the various methods developers use to access QA resources currently?
Yeah. So, to start, I think the most important idea is that when you're building a game, at least the way I've always thought of it, you're building this little virtual world, and contained within that world is basically a set of possible experiences, right? That's what I love about designing a game is no one experiences it the same way. And as a designer, you're trying to sort of shape not just one experience, but all possible experiences. And when you're doing that, there are some experiences that should not exist, right? The experience where your game crashes on national TV, you want to, prune those experiences out of the game, right? Or if the game is unfair or frustrating, you get rid of those. On the other hand, there are positive experiences that you want to have more of, and you want to shape the game towards those. And I feel at a very, very high level, the role of QA is both of those, right? Part of the QA function is finding those kind of negative experiences and getting rid of them. And then another part of it is actually helping refine and improve those positive experiences. How they do that, there's a variety of forms of QA, right? You have traditional kind of automation, unit testing, where you have code do it for you. Usually that's doing very atomic parts of the game. At the other end, you have, human QA, which is actually this, where people are playing the game in a variety of different ways, usually collaborating with other members of the development team to understand, the behavior of the game. And within that, especially within human QA, you can look at some of the work that's incredibly creative and collaborative. And, I am so grateful for every QA person that I've worked with, because, when you have a bug that's hard to repro, or you need a tough decision about, should we change the game this way or that way? Those people who are really experts in the game and the experiences of the game are invaluable. But there's also parts of QA that can be very, very repetitive, where it's okay, there's a giant open world, the player can harvest plants, make sure that every plant is harvestable, brute force search, just, and
run up to every plant.
Exactly. And so at Agentic, really our high level goal is to empower, members of the team, especially folks on the QA team, to use AI to delegate the busy work, to scale themselves, to have, machines do often, I think, the least interesting, the least creative work, and then free up the humans to do what humans are really great at, which is refining the experience, collaborating, things like that.
In that, you mentioned so many different types of testing frameworks. And Christoffer, maybe I can lean to you on this. In there, I heard gameplay testing, I heard unit tests, I heard functional testing. Can you kind of sort out what all of these things are? Kind of maybe explain the ideal test pyramid, unit tests all the way up to functional tests. And what do those actually mean? Nathan, you talked about there are tests that are only in code, and then there's human players. When are these, sort all of those things kind of by labor and also time intensiveness? Because I think also for our audience, that's something that's sort of, and even myself, I'm kind of confused about what are all the different types of tests that you need to do in QA to make sure that your crash on national television does not happen?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I'm happy to take a stab at it at least, and I think I very much agree with what you were saying, Nathan. That there are kind of like two questions that there are many questions, but two fundamental things you're trying to answer with the QA and the testing process, right? Is like, does it work? And the other question is kind of like, is it good or is it doing what we want it to do, right? And you can kind of like think of the testing pyramid as being sort of like made up of that, where like at the bottom of the pyramid, we're trying to answer the question, does it work at all? And we can do that at different sort of like levels of scale and with different kinds of method. And then we try to move the way up and saying like, are we building the thing that we're intending to build? And if we're not, what should we do about it? And how do we react to it? And that's kind of like the way of it, I think, fundamentally, you want to think about QA holistically, but it's something that permeates the whole development process and is part of every stage of the game's development, right? And back to your point, Alex, that's and your point as well, Nathan, that's also why, QA is so intrinsic to everything that we do in the business, and maybe sadly has been a little underserved tool-wise. We can get into why that's the case in a second, perhaps. But sort of like at the bottom of the pyramid, when we were talking about the unit testing, there you're trying to really almost, when you are producing the game, when you're writing code bits, when you're adding assets, you're trying at the smallest functional level to understand, like, does this bit of my game work? And that's incredibly valuable in the day-to-day, because that helps you, like, with every step you're taking forward to answer the question, okay, does this part of the program, does this part of the game do what it needs to do? But then on top of that, once you start putting all these bits together, then you start having these emergent phenomena happening between all the different bits that people made, right? That can be between multiple systems in the code, just two pieces of code. It could also be the fact that you have somebody who's adding an asset as part of a production flow into the game, and an asset is in many ways also a function. That's also a functional piece of the game, right? And now you have multiple disciplines that are interacting, and they're all contributing to the same artifact. So as soon as we set that into dynamic play and it starts operating, we need to add on these like more complex elements of testing, and we start stepping up the pyramid. And so that's when we start going up to things like, smoke testing, for instance, like, will the game run at all? Does it crash when I try to operate it? Under which conditions will it run? Will it not run? And for how long will it run? So we also need to start doing things like soap testing. So we have to figure out, keep this running for a long time. Do we have, memory leaks or other emergent phenomena that only, show up after the application has maybe just been open for a long time, or maybe, has been running for a long time? Then on top of that, we have to think about how does this perform under load and on different hardware targets. So we need to get into performance testing as well. So that means we have to think about how does this run on the different platforms that I'd like to deploy it on, but also if we're doing something that has a multiplayer component, for instance, well, will that also work if 100 clients connect at the same time, if 1,000 clients connect? Now, at this point, we've only really been addressing the question, like, does it work? Like, does it even run? Does it even blow up? But that actually takes up the vast majority of the labor that we're talking about here. And for all of those different processes, I think it's also important to say, you can solve some of that with automation, but you still need to have like a layer here where somebody, when something does go wrong, somebody still has to have a look at it and say, okay, why did it go wrong? What are we going to do about it? Who should take an action on this? And how important is it? How likely is it that it's going to happen again? Do we even know how to reproduce this? So there are all these steps of actually analyzing the information that's coming out of it, right? Then stepping up from there, that's where we can start thinking about things like functional testing. And now we start not quite moving into sort of like the part of it where we say, like, is it good? But we're at least talking about, is it doing what we want? Are the dynamics of the application playing out the way that we would like it to? And so that's, again, sort of like where you start relying more and more on this, human judgment and human intelligence to say, like, is what is happening in the game making sense? Is this really the thing that should be happening? But also, being smart about the combinatorics and saying, have we tried all the things that we really need to try in order to push this, application to the edges? And then finally, moving up from there, considering the game more holistically, then we get into like the area in the space of like play testing, where, your team is playing the game. Is it playing out? Is it giving that experience that we'd like it to have? And at that point, you're probably doing that both with your internal QA, your external QA, and ideally, of course, probably also with your players or somebody who's representative of your player base. And I think where the role of AI is coming in and automation is coming in at the moment is just like you were saying, Nathan, is that, well, if we can take some of the time that's being spent at the bottom of the pyramid, take that away, either through great processes in our organization or through automation or those two things together, then you can really set the people who used to be spending their time there free to operate in the upper part of that pyramid, so to speak. But for me, the takeaway there is just that there are so many components and so many dimensions to quality assurance. But that's one fear could be that that's another reason that it may have been a little underserved from a tooling perspective, because it's a really, really hard problem to solve without having human intelligence in there.
Yeah. Well, first, that was incredibly. I feel much more educated because I think that there's all the way that you broke this down. Does it work? Does it work at all? And then is it functioning as intended? And then there is is it good? Right? Is the three different tranches of QA testing, and you actually need all of that the whole way through the whole life cycle. And I think I can't remember which one of you guys said this, but you sort of. We're talking about how testing needs change over the course of a game's production lifecycle. You said different players have different intelligence, and it sounds like it's not even just different players have different intelligence. It's also entirely different types of testing, things that require players and things that actually don't require players at all. And so, before we kind of jump into the actual components of, I think this is a great point to switch over to Modal.ai and Agentic's role in QA and what you guys are doing in that actual pyramid. Which of the things are you actually servicing? Because it actually might be a lot of them. Just giving some perspective for how big QA organizations are at gaming companies, because we talked about people spending a lot of time in the unit tests, the more does it even work at all? At the bottom of the pyramid. And I'm not sure what it was like at EA. And Christoffer, maybe you also have an interesting perspective given your background in some indie studios, but the QA org at Blizzard was 400 people, if not more. Now, obviously this was for many titles, but that is an army, right? And the Activision Blizzard QA union, for example, stands at 600 people strong. And so do you guys have any perspectives on the way that you saw QA org staffed to kind of give us some perspective of, just simply how enormous is this task in terms of headcount?
I think one thing that's important to qualify it too is that there's not such a thing as the QA org. Usually you have, for example, dev QA, which are, members of the, employees usually of the same company, usually working, very, very closely with, kind of committed to one game at a time, experts in that game, just as focused on it as, an animator or an engineer. Then often you have, kind of a shared service QA model, or sometimes it's called pub QA, where it's a broader pool of people that may move from one game to another based on where they are in development. So often they'll have expertise certification or other kind of common processes that every game goes through at certain points in the life cycle. And then more recently, there's often been outsourced QA beyond that as well, where they look at a vendor who has another body of people that you can bring on at certain times. And so different studios, different game companies, whether you're at indie or AAA, it all looks different. But I think it's just that's the what you even think about tooling, the workflow, who does what. It depends a little bit on which group you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think if we're thinking about it from the indie perspective, or at least some of the productions that I've been part of, in most productions you're probably actually, one of the challenges there is that you just don't have enough QA. You don't have access to enough people. Or you have to outsource it, but you can only do it for a certain period of time, and you'd like to have more than you can get probably. Or you're reliant on the publisher QA and having those people help you out often, maybe a little later in the process than you might like, right? So it's also just a case of do you have those resources at all? And if you don't have a dedicated resource, what happens then? Well, at that point, you probably start leaning on the rest of the team, and everybody becomes part of that function. So yeah, at different ends of the industry, there might be sort of different makeups in terms of in the bigger productions, you have these large groups. At the smaller end of the spectrum, you're kind of just missing resources at all, as it were.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah,
okay.
I think another kind of take on this is that I think when you look at what are the kind of what limits you, in terms of the ability to solve, or what do you need from QA? What Q abilities do you want? So I think one thing you want is actually access to the game, right? Where QA, different within these different groups, often different people have more or less access to the actual game itself. And so, of course, an engineer on the gaming team has the most access, and usually dev QA has more access than, say, pub QA or outsourced QA. And so one of the things you often want to do is actually give QA people more access to the game, more ability to sort of shape the game, exercise the game, test the game, do automation. And so I think that's actually one really interesting opportunity that both of our companies are looking at, which is that you essentially use AI as a way of expanding the pool of people who have access to the game and its automation. I think another thing you can look at is just the number of people that you have, like actually testing the game, or the number of agents that you have. Games have gotten, in my professional lifetime, just bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think you can see, if you're like an indie team, you're probably using like procedural content creation techniques. If you're a AAA team, you have, enormous amounts of engineers and artists to build that game. And if you're doing a game as a service, your players are content. If you have UGC, the state space of the game is even bigger. And so I think there's been this macro trend towards games becoming rapidly more complex. And that has, I think, generally speaking, really outstripped the ability for traditional teams just keep up with the scope of the game. And so I think there's this other dimension, which is how many just people can you bring to bear at any one time? And then the final, which is you want to think of scale. But then the last piece I'll say is like flexibility, where game development is not like kind of a linear, constant process. There are kind of ebbs and flows to it. And so often, let's say you want to do infrastructure, you want to like load test your servers. You're doing a multiplayer game. You want to know, today we're in development. Today we have 0 concurrent players, and we want to test what would happen if our infrastructure had 1 million concurrent players. Well, how, now do you need to have 1 million concurrent players around the clock? No, that's you're not there yet. So today, folks say, well, maybe you wait for early access or something like that. But ideally, what you'd want to do is sort of if you could have 1 million people jump on your game for a weekend, or an evening, collect data, turn it all off, and then go back to making the game, like that would be ideal. But that flexibility, the ability to kind of scale up and scale down, you can't do that with live players because they want to actually play the game. You can't do that with QA, so if you look at these sort of 3 things, like how much access does QA have, how much scale does QA have, how much flexibility does QA have, I think the kind of technologies that we're building can really benefit, all 3 of those areas. And again, not at all as a replacement to QA, but actually as a complement, as like giving the people who do the work the ability to do things they couldn't before, to work at a scale they couldn't before, and to be dynamic in a way they couldn't before.
Yeah, I think if I can latch on to those like 3 concepts, like access, scale, and flexibility, especially when you're thinking about scale and flexibility, it doesn't even have to be that much before you start really enabling teams altogether. If you can, give them access to a number of virtual players. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We've talked to a number of like multiplayer studios where, they're being built out by teams that are just like the core team is smaller than the number of people that the multiplayer game is intended for. So that means that not only like if you want to play test your game, for instance, or just like see if it works, like even if you take every developer in the studio and ask them to spend their Friday afternoon doing that, it's still not going to be enough. And so what that means in terms of flexibility is it's very hard to get like a proper test of what it is that you're building. And that in turn means that your iteration cycles become long. And I think most people who are in game dev would say that like shorter iteration cycles are usually preferable because it gives you a faster path to understanding, again, to answer that question, is it good or not, right? And that's also a place where I think that these AI tools can help out a lot, because if we can start tightening some of those iteration loops that are going on in development, I think everyone can, save time, save effort, but also get faster to the creative goal that everybody on the team is trying to reach.
Well, I was going to ask you both to pitch me on why studios should look towards AI for QA, but I'm sold. What you've already said seems to be incredibly valuable. Shorter iteration cycles, and actually even the capacity to even perform the tests at scale, access, and in flexible ways, Nathan, as you said. So I guess this is a great time to actually start shifting towards talking about Modal.ai and Agentic specifically. And, we have this framework. We understand what QA encompasses. We understand how big orgs have been in the past, or we understand how indies have got it done in the past. And we understand what the QA needs might be over the course of the project. So I would love to hear from you guys about, where are your companies starting? What developments, where in the development cycle are you guys, you guys as your specific companies based on where you are in your own product roadmap today, equipped to help? What genres of games are you equipped to help? And does that actually change based on whether or not you're a mobile platform or maybe a third-person shooter? Nathan, maybe you can kick us off here. What is actually who's the first guest, I guess, the first QA customer of Agentic? What do they look like?
Yes. Yeah, so we basically just announced at GDC this past year, which is pretty fun. We're working with our first design partners right now. Those are mostly look like AA and AAA studios. As a company, our big focus, our mission, we want to serve game developers, right? Help them be more effective. And so we're looking at the areas where we think that our technology has the highest marginal utility, where there's like a significant improvement in using, a technology like Agentic relative to the next best thing. And so we think that, certainly real-time games we can benefit a lot more because you have this very complicated simulation. And we're currently focused on avatar-based games where you control a particular character in the world. So it'd be first person, third person, MOBA, etc. But kind of fundamentally within that, kind of space of genres, our approach is that we want to give game developers on the team, and I include the QA folks in that, we want to give them a tool to create AI that do useful work for them, because we think that the broad pattern is you want more players of your game. Christoffer made a great example of like that. How do we it's a battle royale? There's 30 of us at the company, and we have 100 players per match. Like that's a case where, because at QA, not usually in a formal sense, but you want to be able to inject more players into your game. If you have that, that big gap between, your unit testing and your human testing, where, your unit test very little and you want to automate more, of the busy work, smoke tests, often you want to do that by injecting more players. Now, these players may play in a different way, but it's all, you want agents to interact with and play your game. And so what the thing is that every game is different. So you can't take a one size fits all. You need a tool that can adapt itself or be adapted to the specifics of each individual game. And also the workflows and the sort of scenarios that developers care about vary from one company to the next. And so our approach at Agentic overall is, rather than saying okay, we will give you this turnkey, you must use it this way for this purpose. Whereas no, it's much more like behavioral Photoshop. We will give you a tool that allows you to define and train and deploy agents that are useful for you. And I can talk about the tech, behind that in a little bit, but that's at a high level, it's about empowering these teams with a tool, especially one that allows non-programmers, non-AI engineers, kind of a wide variety of folks on the team to create these agents that do useful work as you define it. And then once defined, you can deploy the agents, whenever you want, wherever you want, however you want.
Yeah, I am super excited to talk about the how there and what it actually looks like from the developer perspective. So we're definitely going to go there. But Christoffer, any reactions to that? If things are similar, things are different at Modal.ai. For you guys, where are you focusing on the development cycle, and what gaming platforms, what game genres, what type of studios are you guys looking to work with first?
Yeah, for sure. I think in terms of the core problem, very much agree with everything you were saying, Nathan. You at Modal.ai, we're also very oriented towards bringing quote unquote AI that works. So it does useful work, but also AI that just pragmatically works to productions. So we'd rather give you something sooner that'll move the needle for your team right away than sell you on a big bang project or anything like that, right? In terms of how we've gone to it, I think we also start with the type of game, because that kind of determines what kind of AI is good for solving practical issues in them. So yes, we've also focused a lot on avatar or character-based games, games where there's one singular player character, but you can ask the AI to control. That also makes it perhaps easier to learn from what players are doing. That's part of what we do. And some of our approaches is to observe what players are doing and then replicate that inside of the build. And then the second thing that we've been looking at is actually just the GUI layer and all the things that are core gameplay, but also supporting that. So that could be for, obviously we have a game that's completely made up of a GUI, like a narrative game or something, a 2D narrative game might be put together that way. But also if you have a store that you're releasing quite often, that's just something that we found to be valuable to many teams, because it's you're, again, like we were talking about before, you're putting in a lot of assets, you're making a lot of changes all the time. You might be releasing weekly, daily, multiple times a day. There are just like a lot of things that can slip through the cracks there. So that's like another place where you can help folks out. Terms of the studio types, I think we've done a lot of our work recently together with AA's and some AAA's. I think what characterizes those organizations is also that typically you have that functional specialization. So you have somebody to sit on the other side and kind of like be the your champion or your ally that receives it. That's always good to have somebody who understands the mission you're on, who can relate to it. We actually do have a product out that indies can install and use on their own, but take some of the functionality. But generally what we're also trying to do is to provide our tool to folks in a way where, we help you get started, we'll give you support to get going with it. And then over time you make it yours by extending it into the functions that you need it to do. Because as you were saying, Nathan, every game is different. So the only team that can really define what AI needs to do for your game is your team, right? Well, we can help you, we can give you the tools, but at the end of the day, you'll know where it kind of like moves the needle for you. And we tend to approach it, with three different things in mind. One is like what we're putting together needs to be informed by the craft of game making, and it needs to understand the workflow that devs are going through. Then you need to have AI behaviors that are practically useful, but I don't think they always need to be human-like. Sometimes you just want a bot that just like pushes every bot button or like tries to visit every part of the map or anything like that. So we tend to think about it as sort of like there's almost like an intelligence ladder for AI agents or AI bots, where some are useful for some things, others are useful for other things. And then the third thing that we bring is we have an infrastructure solution that you can either have it with us or you can deploy it with yourself. So often if it's a barrier to kind of like figure out how do I spin up a lot of instances to like test my game at scale, that's something that we can help out with as well. And target-wise, we've built out our tooling mostly for Unreal and Unity, but we can technically support most targets. But obviously for the big engines, we try to have a nicer interface for folks to work with.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys have basically, from this concept, that Nathan, I think it was you that were lamenting the relationship between AI and games at the present. Games are being used to develop AI techniques versus AI companies helping game developers make good games. It sounds like basically from both what your context you're providing is that you already have tools that have production readiness and are working alongside QA devs at this moment in time for some AA indie studios in a way that's actually pragmatic and applicable. And so maybe I would love to hear actually maybe a success story, Nathan and Christoffer, about something that you guys have done alongside a studio and how that has actually gone down. And, how did you ensure predictability? You guys talked about this phrase called the deterministic hammer, which I would love for you to elaborate upon for our audience about what that is. Would love to hear about how that's actually working day to day for some studios right now.
Yeah, Christoffer, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, maybe it makes sense to take outside just like a specific case, but we've worked with before. It's a game that's shipped now, but we worked with them for a year and a half, a couple of years, and for this particular title was built out by, I think they were a 50-person team or something around that size. So it's kind of like where you have some dedicated QA resources, but you wish you had more. And what we did with this team was that they were building it's a multiplayer looter shooter with not procedurally generated maps, but they would sort of dynamic map loading and big areas and things like that. And they were just facing that it would take them like 40 minutes to play through a level, also story content and everything for a human tester, right? And they were shipping the game with 100 levels, and then with variations, it was going to be 300. And it was just like way out of scope for what they could do with that team to have continuous testing in there. So what do you do about that? Well, for this particular title, the thing that ended up being, I think, the most valuable thing to them was consistent and continuous performance testing of the game. So the sort of like the flow that they got into was that every week their build would go to our test servers. We would scale it up. We would test all the levels overnight. So that means that when you leave the office Friday, then when you show up Monday, then you basically have smoke tests and performance tests and functional tests across all those different maps. And then that informs you, like, which of these do I send on to human QA? Which do we just know, okay, there's something totally broken here? And maybe also crucially, you can look at the maps and then, week to week to week, you can say like, okay, is the performance getting better? Or actually, did we make a code change that now completely broke this one map? What do we do about that? So it becomes sort of like a way of taking the temperature on your game over time. It was interesting. We could see in the usage from the studio, every time that they were getting closer to a milestone, or they were shipping a new feature, or they were going to do a release. That's kind of like when all of that testing consumption really went up. So you could see the team using it, and I think that's one of the most validating things when you're working with a team. But you can actually see like where are they in their process, and what we're doing seems to be making a difference to them because we're using it, more at these like key points in the development process.
Yeah, a couple from our side. One, there's a studio we worked with last year. It was a similar size studio PC console game, and this is a game. It's like a kind of action brawler with procedural world generation, designed for between 1 and 8 players. And when we started working with them at Alpha when the team was getting a handle on the game itself. But they were realizing that their number one risk was multiplayer, especially when you had like 8 concurrent players. That just stressed everything more than when it was single player, except they had 2 full-time dev QA. And so they had this basic problem. They're like, we want every test to be an 8-player co-op test. We don't have that many people to, that's actually bigger than the test team itself. And so what we helped them is we created agents that were like kind of companions, where you would have a human, and the human would be the kind of implicit leader. And then the agents would join, and you could choose whether they'd follow along and kind of be good buddies, or just be randos and go off in their own direction. But the thing that we do is our integrations, whether it's Unity or Unreal or proprietary, we kind of integrate at the player controls layer. So we this is a bit in the weeds, but a lot of bot frameworks kind of bypass the player controls. They actually connected the game with kind of lower level systems, so they look like a player, but they don't actually interact with the game the way that a human does. And we think that's really important, that if you want to truly exercise the game like a player, you have to integrate in the right way. And so in our case, we integrated like a real player, so they could actually spin up a bunch of little headless. Basically, whenever a tester would test the game, they would kind of fire up the main game, and then 7 little headless game instances that had agents in them that all join the same game instance. And all of a sudden, lots of, like, oh my goodness, like this is here, there's a crash when this happens, latency spikes here. And in a lot of cases, the developer, they had the ability to catch those defects, on their own. They just didn't know they were there without having, a consistent suite of players. I think another thing that I think is also interesting is that even though, QA, I think, is the kind of the obvious first application of this technology, we really see it as a tool for the entire dev team. Other examples, let's say you're an animator and you're just like iterating on the moveset of a character. Your tool of choice is, Maya, you're animating, you're trying to work with, real data or mocap data, your own inspiration, pull it all together, export it to the game. But in practice today, you often have to just like sit there and then like play the game to do a move over and over, and then go back, work in Maya, play the game some more. And that iteration cycle, like Christoph was saying, is like that the longer that iteration cycle is, the less productive you are. And so actually just training an agent to be like, do this move over and over again, or like do this combo, is actually, now you could just let the agent, this is AI in a very simple sense, but if you can define that and train it and deploy it without writing any code, without knowing anything about behavior trees or state machines, you're like, yeah, hey, AI, do this thing over and over again. And now you can iterate on your animation, just look over, oh, that's looking better, keep it, and now you've got, a move set that you like. And, is that like a AGI kind of, application? No, but it's incredibly useful and productive, right?
Yeah. And maybe that's a lot about the distinction, like you said before, about the relationship between AI and games, this being useful to game developers versus some sort of AGI statement, like you said before. And, first of all, that was super helpful because I guess from the studio perspective, right, you're saying, okay, how does this actually work? And it sounds like at least from the agentic side, it's kind of like almost like being in like a Final Fantasy party-based combat system where you're like, okay, I'm playing Kingdom Hearts and Donald Duck I'm gonna set him to utility player. I'm gonna set him to aggro. He's only allowed to heal me at all times. He's never allowed to attack anybody, right? You're kind of setting the customized behaviors of the characters or the other players in the game to be alongside you to help and aid with that QA testing. Is that generally way that some studios can think about it?
Yeah, I feel like Christoffer and I could probably get into the technical weeds for a long, long time, but I'll try to hold myself back from getting too deep. But with Agentic, basically, we provide SDKs for Unity, Unreal, and proprietary game engines. So you pick the SDK that matches your game engine, you integrate it, and then we provide you with, depending on your game engine, different ways of defining an agent. And agents are kind of fundamentally defined as the actions that they can take, and that's like jump, move, look, fireball, use item, whatever. And then you also define what are called observations, which is for us the kind of the parts of the game state that the agent cares about. And so if that's like in a third-person shooter, well, you probably care about the enemies. You might care about your next objective and where that is. You probably care about the static world around you, obstacles and things like that. So we give developers tools in the SDK, kind of in the game editor, to define one or more agents. But then once you've defined them, you actually need to tell them what to do. You need to train them, quote unquote. And with Agentic, we provide a conversational, human in the loop approach for defining, training, and deploying agents. And so the way that once you've integrated the SDK, the way that you train a new agent is you launch your game. We give you a chat interface in our SDK, and you talk to the agent and you tell it what you want it to do. And so if you say, I want you to go, be a healer and heal under these conditions, the agent will actually write code against kind of a scripting language. It's part of our SDK that's customized per agent, per game. And so essentially the AI will kind of try to write a script to do what you asked it to do. We'll do some validation. We'll deploy that into your game live. You can see the agent actually do its version of what you asked it to do. Sometimes it's perfect and you can basically approve it, or you can give it additional feedback like, too much healing, or actually, I forgot to tell you this important detail. So there's this, you essentially have a conversation with the agent, and what you're doing is you're giving that agent a set of skills, and often skills build on top of other skills. A lot of what we do is we allow you to do that without writing any code. There's a lot that we do to actually allow an LLM to write code that's functional in the context of a game. We're kind of an adapter in that sense. And then as you train skills for the agent can learn them, memorize them, and then you can deploy the agents later on with those skills. And you can do that conversationally or through an API if you want to do it with automation. But there's lots of really interesting reasons of why we chose that approach. There's other approaches that are also compelling in different ways. But I think that some really high level things that we believe in are that it's human in the loop and that it's a tool, right? That it's not it's tempting to think of AI as like a magic lamp. You're like, test the game, genie, I have 3 wishes, and then somehow magic happens and it's like it all works. But that's not how this works at all, right? It's like really we need to leverage what AI is really good at, like scale, flexibility, writing code on your behalf, and also leverage what humans are good at, which is like creativity, context, purposefulness. And so the way that we see that working is to, rather than being like, here's a magic lamp, here's a black box, instead, here's a tool that gives you some new superpowers. But fundamentally, because it's a tool, it has an interface, you can use it in different ways. You can actually have final say over whether the behavior is what you want. And we think that kind of developer experience, framing, infrastructure, all of that in service of the human is what we're excited about and what we've really built our product around.
Yeah, I think philosophically we're coming from very much the same place and also from the same starting point. But it's kind of like, well, if you have an agent in the game, it needs to know 2 things, right? It needs to know what can I do and what's going on. And those are kind of that's the starting point for many, for almost all, well, for any agent-based approach, right? We also have an SDK, but we take as sort of like the starting point for the developers to get going. We do setup that sounds a lot like how it works with Agentic. Ask the developer. Like nobody knows the game better than the developers themselves. So it would be like a total waste to try and guess what is this game about instead of just having the developers tell you by setting it up with the SDK. So that's like our core approach as well. And what that gives you is sort of like a summary of like what is this game about, and that's like the perfect bit of like expert information to get your AI started. So once you have that in there, I think that's where in the model approach we diverge a little bit. I think that's a great approach, but you're taking, Nathan, I definitely see the strengths of that. I think we approach it a little bit with some pre-baked behaviors that can get you going without any input from other than setting up the SDK. So that's where we try to move the needle for devs, like out of the box, where we say you don't have to tell it anything, you don't have to do anything, just set it up, let it go. But it's not going to play like a human, but it'll do something for you. And then the way that we interact, or sort of like, but we think about informing the agent about what it's supposed to be doing inside of the game is very much based on showing at the moment. So a lot of our approaches is kind of like rooted in the fact that QA and dev teams in general will have like a lot of test cases defined, and they will be running through them, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, over and over and over again. And that's kind of like a perfect starting point for asking the developer to show me what this game is about and just like demonstrate for me how you would do this. Because I think we're very rooted in the notion that if you have done something, five times over and over in the same day, it should be automatable. We just have to find the right technological way of doing it. So that's kind of like where we build a lot of our approaches on having, like leveraging the fact that you already have a team that are executing these functions. We can learn from sort of like seeing what we're doing in the game. And then, by virtue of doing it in the game, they can then also demonstrate, is this what we want to happen inside of the game? And then that becomes the basis of building up the behaviors. So also, like a similar approach, I guess, but based more on seeing like what the people who are building the game are doing with it, and then replicating that in there. Then once you get enough behavior of that, we can start merging like that data together, and then building models that are typically, more adept at playing the game in a general fashion.
Yeah, so this is, first, sounds like there's slightly two different approaches, but same kind of situation where you're kind of plugging into an SDK as a studio, and you're basically either empowering an agentic agent to play in a certain way, or Christoffer, you're talking that Modal.ai kind of has these custom preset agents modals, agents and modals. The agents and modals come to my game and they help me out. And so actually, I think this is a great time to actually transition to like, what does this actually look like in terms of a business relationship between yourself and the studios, for you and for the studio? And so, ostensibly it sounds like, you'd partner up with you guys. Walk me through like what that actual onboarding looks like, and also tell me a little bit about like what this costs to run for the studio. Obviously, like potentially we're saving time, but one could presume that some of these large scale tests are expensive. Who's bearing the costs for those tests? Is it the studio? Is it you guys? Nathan, how about you? You kick us off.
Yeah, sure. So, we're a SaaS business, so software as a service. It's fundamentally you pay per unit agent time. So, if you have 1,000 agents play your game for an hour, or one agent play for 1,000 hours, it's the same cost. With our customers, we're right now invite only. So we're doing, the pricing is all private, but it's essentially tiered usage-based pricing, where, developers, they need to be able to, increase like Christoffer was saying earlier, there are seasons where you're doing a lot of automation. There are other seasons where you're doing less. And so people need the flexibility to go up and go down. But we've also heard from a lot of customers that the thing they're most afraid of is like some script goes rogue and they wake up to a, $1 million cloud bill or, infrastructure bill they weren't expecting. So they want, that sounds good to me, but they really want to have kind of capped costs, right? So the ability to have predictable expenditures. But really conceptually, we think of our agents as like little virtual contractors, right? They will, you can deploy them in your game. They'll be confidential, right? So they won't tell anyone else about the specifics of your game. They'll learn as they play your game, and they'll learn how to do it better. But then also that they may carry some of the meta learning from one game to the next, even though they won't carry any of the specifics of your game from one to the next.
Interesting.
Yeah, and over on our side, we're also a SaaS business, so that is that's kind of like taking the same approach here. I think what we want to do is, the more we want to provide value to our customers by having them want to use our products, and we want the testing to be helpful for them, and that's also why we take a consumption-based approach. We basically say, it's very straightforward. We want you to want to use this product, and the more you use it, probably the better your game is going to be, the better off we're going to be, and that's kind of like how we succeed together. In the industry, we want to be part of that movement, and that's how we've set it up. So with Modal.ai, we typically set you up with a running subscription package that gives you hours of testing. That testing will involve one of our bots in one way or the other. And basically we'll spin up, machines that will run for the allotted amount of time that you'd like to test your game for. And then that can happen on demand. Some teams like to manage it themselves and just be very manual about it and say, we want to test it now. Other teams maybe want it to be part of their continuous integration pipeline and say, given certain conditions, we just fire off a build and it goes up there and we'll spin up, 10 or 20 or 100 copies, run the testing, consume the results on the other end. So that's the same approach that we're taking. I think in terms of the onboarding experience, that's something we've spent a lot of time talking to customers about and experimenting with and trying to figure out how to get these tools to fit into people's workflows. And with the kind of customers that we have at the moment, the conversation often goes along the lines of, we need help, but we're really busy and probably too busy to get it on our own. So what we've decided to do in Modal.ai is that if you decide to onboard with us, one of the things that we set you up with as you're coming in is what we call our developer success engineers, which is basically, as a person who will sit next to you and make sure that you get the tool implemented in a good way, that you get the most value out of it, that they'll help define your first test cases with the AI automation, all those different things. Because at the end of the day, it's as we were talking about before, it's all about the team and the people who are building the game, and you need to help them adapt to it. And we've just found that if you have somebody to get you going, that usually can help sort of drive that transformation in the production. And when the team's ready, you can hand over the keys and they can start building out with the tools on their own. Yeah, I was going to say yes. Yeah, and we never go away. We're always around for support, right? But the idea is that we get you going, and then you take it away when you feel that you're ready for it.
Yeah, we have a similar model, and that's part of the reason why we're invite only right now, where we're working with select studios to make sure that we can provide that kind of high touch onboarding experience. I also agree with Christoffer that there's this interesting balance that you want to strike where these are, like we said, this is a tool, but it's a new kind of tool. And so teams need, at minimum, some help. Like, how do I use the tool? What's the most effective, right? In some cases, there's more than that. There's the integration of we actually want some help, not just understanding it, but connecting it into the details of our game. Sometimes it's not just integrating it, it's setting up things. But I think that, that it's important for companies like ours to be available in that way to help get people off the ground. But I think we also both, there's this other trap where if you do too much of that for too long, then the game teams don't really internalize it, and ultimately what I think both of our companies aspire to is a tool that the teams value, not just because it's work that somebody else has done, but they value because it makes their day-to-day job easier. And then the more they value it, the more they use it, the more they're able to own it. And that's the sort of path from, early on kind of high touch support to a sustainable, scalable business.
Yeah. In a way, you're actually quite similar to the back-end gaming engine business, where, it would take way longer for me to build a QA org by myself to almost especially for smaller studios, an undoable amount. So this is a little bit of a build or buy situation. And what you guys are basically suggesting is that your business models they should be saving these studios a tremendous amount of money, right? Whether or not you're on a subscription package or whether or not you're on a consumption-based model. At the end of the day, right, I should need to hire, my org before needed to be 70 QA people, and now it can be 2 QA guys partnered with either Agentic or Modal.ai.
Yeah, I don't actually, and there I was slightly there. I don't know that I would say don't hire the 70 people. I would say still hire just the 70 people can just do way more than smoke testing the build and harvesting all the plants, right? So and I think it's really important not to see this as a zero-sum game of humans versus robots fight, but I'm the more humans, the better. And even if you have those 70 people, I guarantee all of them can be more productive, help you make a bigger and better game. If you add a technology like Modal or Agentic.
Yeah, I mean, historically, automation has usually led to more growth and more productivity and basically more prosperity being created. Sometimes I call it the spreadsheet effect. It sounds like a boring story, right? But when VisiCalc and the first spreadsheets came out, everybody thought like, oh, accounting is going to be automated, right? There's more accounting than ever happening in the world, and that's kind of like the way it tends to go with this kind of automation. So not too pessimistic about that side of it, I suppose.
Yeah. And maybe that's, you were drawing to a point that I was going to try and close on, which was, this is the cyclical pattern of industries, right? Which leads to more leisure time. I started reading a book about, generational change. And, it was talking about this idea that, back in the day, we spent 1 million hours harvesting corn, and now we have machines help us harvest corn, which has allowed us to make the iPhone, right? That sounds like a pretty good life improvement. And so, maybe perhaps the wave of AI that's happening in games is going to be very similar, where it is going to allow, like you said, Nathan, the people who are humans to do the things that they're the best at while taking away some of the brunt work. And I think like that's, earlier in this episode, we talked about the ATVI QA union. And for those of the audience that have been keeping up with the news, the Activision Quality Assurance United, CWA, formed to protect QA salaries, labor protections, and overall to fight for their status rights to stay at parity with developers and other software engineers. This was initially sparked by QA testers at Raven, but it grew over time. And I think that, Nathan, to your point, you're not saying don't hire these 70 people, just empower them to do more. But at the same time, this is the appeal of things and tools like this is to allow a studio who would be otherwise able to do full productions testing fit it into their budget. And this isn't just the QA thing. Like, this is the entirety of the efficiency tools for the game sector's value proposition. And so I think that that's important for us to just kind of address head on, is that like it is actually going to allow us to move away from brute forcing things, but brute force before costed money, which I think is obviously where the business value proposition comes from your companies. But guys, this is such an amazing episode, and I learned so much from this about the different types of QA testing, where Agentic and Modal could really impact a studio. And I have a final question for you guys before we kind of close and wrap. We're 10 years into the future. What do you guys think that the future of QA testing looks like? And how do you envision that relationship between AI and man to be? Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think given the rate of progress that we're seeing, in machine learning and AI, 10 years is going to be a long time. It's going to be, I think any prediction made today, about 2034 should be taken with a giant grain of salt. But I think there's a few things. And again, I think, I'll go back to, our company name, like Agentic, right? Helping people achieve their goals. And my hope is that, in 10 years or well before then, that we're a technology that helps everyone on the dev team achieve their goals more effectively. And so, if you're a tester, your goals are to like cover the whole game, which is very, very, which is very hard to do given procedural content creation, UGC. So we'll give you a tool to scale yourself and delegate the busy work. One of your goals very often is actually to be closer to design, right? If you go into QA as a career, often it's because you care about games and you want to help them be more fun. Well, we're going to free you up to let you do more, spend more of your time on like, not does it work, but is it enjoyable? For the rest of the dev team, same story, right? You're an animator, you want to focus on your craft. The agents will help, designer, infra engineer, whatever. Or you want to shape the experience, give your players a better experience, we'll help you there. But I think honestly, the 10-year vision is way bigger than that, where we're going to see agents permeate software development. And in the same way as like right now, if you do a task on a computer, you use a GUI, right? Your experience is mediated by and facilitated by, windows and icons. And that helps people who aren't programmers, who don't like console commands, be more like use computers. It helps all of us be more productive. There are many things that you can't do with, if you want to paint on a computer, you can't do that in a command line. And so, I think that agents are really going to be the next generation of interface, where more and more of your work will be facilitated by, mediated by, in collaboration with an agent. An agent that, and I think agents that are increasingly capable, intelligent, directable, collaborative. And so I think in that 10-year time frame, what you're going to see is everyone on the team, maybe even without fully realizing it, is using agents in different ways in order to be more productive, more creative, and hopefully, make games that are richer and more rewarding, more polished, than we can make right now.
Awesome. Well, that's a beautiful future.
well, adding on to that, I think 10 years is such a long time in terms of like what we've seen just like in the last 2 to 3 years. But I also think it's gonna be, you're gonna have these assistants or these agents or these AI features that are gonna ask you questions like what would you like to happen. So again, if we think about the quality of a product, right, it's going to be less about press A, like does this sequence work? It's going to be is this what we would like to happen? Is your game supposed to work this way? I made this change. Do you like it? I think it's entirely realistic that if you think about having agents that or bots that interact with games, that actually play them, right, that then produce ways of seeing what happened inside the game, automatically identifying issues, not just like functional things or code level things like crashes or missing assets, but maybe also you could imagine easily that you'd be able to detect things like textual glitches, or you could maybe even identify that certain constellations of things in the game scene as it's being rendered to the player are not really exactly what you're looking for. And then 10 years down the line, it's absolutely thinkable that agent would then also go back to the game project and suggest a change to it, right? So there's like there could be another leap where you say like, what happens after we identify the bug? Well, then we go and make the suggestion how to change it and fix it. And then the role of the tester really becomes, we become sort of like the decision maker in that process and answering these questions. Is this what we wanted to do? You're directing the process of what the game is becoming over time. So I think that'll be a big part of what testing looks like some years down the line. And then I think the other thing is that like games as experiences are going to become even larger than they are now. That would be my guess anyway, just because we now have tools to generate more content faster, and players are participating in that as well with UGC and everything, right? But that then, also asks for, that causes you to ask a question, which player sees what part of the content? So what part of the content should go to who? As we're bringing people into these games, right? And I would imagine that the testing role also becomes part of that, kind of like annotating the experience, like building kind of like a map of the game that is now so large that no one can see all of it like in one go, right? So what's appropriate for which person? That's kind of like a natural extension of like the design intent that you have, that you're building a game. Again, answering the question, is it good? But also, who is it good for?
Yeah, so I was just saying, I think I agree with this. Really, there's that commercial from the 90s about there's the two QA testers, and like, hold on, I've got to tighten up the graphics on level 3. So my vision is that, in the future, you'll just tell the agent, tighten up the graphics on level 3, and it'll happen. That's the true vision.
The true dream state. All right, guys. Well, I loved hearing about your visions of the future. 10 years down the line, where are we with QA? And it was such a pleasure to have you guys both on. There's so much opportunity in this space, clearly. If anybody from the audience would love to get in touch with you, either because they're looking to work alongside you, they want to have a further conversation, they're just a fan, how can they get in touch?
Go to our website, Agentic.ai.
And same thing for us, it's Modl.AI. So model without the E.
Amazing. A model without the E. All right. So basically, we concluded the episode, and then we got into the breakout room, and we decided that there needed to be an addendum, a couple of minutes to discuss a couple of things around quality of life for QA, and also around the things that Modal and Agentic are not doing in order to train their players. And so, Nathan, why don't you kick us off on your appendix thoughts?
Yeah, well, so first, I think I'll talk to the quality of life, because it's a really, really important subject that, it's very easy to focus on game quality and, saving money. But I think one of the big issues in game development, certainly in my professional experience, is that it can be a very, very hard job, right? And there's still an industry with a lot of overtime, a lot of stress. And I think if you think about what are the causes of that, I think very often it's because you're making the game and it's just barely under control, and you're trying to find bugs. But inevitably, if you're not able to sort of scale, your testing, your dev processes, then you wind up, bugs sneak in. They stay there for months at a time. Other bugs get built on top of them. You finally find and fix that first bug, and then more things break. And for a lot of teams, the crunch at the end of development is just to like get the bugs to burn down close to zero, right? Like and so I think that actually automation has this really great opportunity to improve people's like quality of life, like day to day and year to year. And that if you can actually be just consistently exercising more of your team, automating the busy work, then you're going to actually like your game on a moment to moment basis is going to be more fun. You'll spend more of the time doing the things you like. But there's really, really strong evidence that you can also keep your kind of maximum number of bugs in control, which means that the process of finaling the game or shipping the next season is way, way, way more tractable and reasonable without just sort of like throwing the candle of your life at the problem.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's actually something that is most keenly seen from the QA perspective, right? If there's any part of the organization that understands how smooth the process could be if this was like a continuous thing rather than something that was built up and then addressed at the end, it's probably the people who are directly like involved in that. I just remembered that QualiCon just finished yesterday, which is this like great online event that bring QA professionals together and talk about it. And there's a lot of the topics that came up there were precisely on scaling and automating and structuring and systematizing, both at sort of like the social technical layers, like how do we work, but also in terms of the hard technical layer, what do we work with? So there's definitely that. I think that movement is happening in the industry. Everybody understands that there's a potential to be gained by automation, but I think a lot of people are still waiting to see it to come to fruition. And I think hopefully companies like ours can start providing some of the tools that can actually make that happen for folks, so that you don't sleep under your desk, but so that you don't have like those super long days that end up just costing a lot at the personal level.
Awesome. All right, epilogue part 2. Let's talk a little bit about what you guys are not doing in terms of large language models and the kind of academic approach from the research companies in AI versus you guys being more production readiness tools for game developers.
Well, we were just talking about it. I guess neither of us do reinforcement learning at scale, and that's because when you're doing that kind of agent construction where the AI basically learns the game from a set of high level objectives and just from interacting with the game, just the cost of scaling that up in terms of for how long you need to run the game, in terms of like how many agents or how many bots, how many sessions you need to run, how much data you need to collect. That's a very, very expensive process to do. And it may make sense for certain games at a certain scale, but as a general solution problem for the games industry, at least in terms of like where we stand right now, it's not something that really seems to be cost effective or within reach for most productions. Because if you look at some of like that really, really impressive work that's been done with bots for playing, Dota or StarCraft or racing games like the Sophie AI that came out of the Sony team, all of that is super impressive and it's really great AI work. But the amount of effort that goes into generating that, which has put you outside, like both in terms of the effort, like to build it for a game specifically, perhaps, but also just the amount of compute that you would need to expend to make it happen, would end up taking up such a large chunk of your game budget that it would be out of scale for 90% of the industry probably. Sorry, Nathan, over to you.
No, not at all. Yeah, and I think because earlier we were talking about the differences between the agentic approach and the model approach, and I think it's natural, right? Like there's actually probably more than one approach that works, and there's different trade-offs. But the thing, I didn't want to go unsaid was what Christoffer just mentioned, which is that I think that if you come to the space from the outside and you feel like, well, AlphaStar was 2018, like they trained an AI that can play the game, so. Why is this like a hard problem? Like, why do we, why can't you just like take that algorithm, wrap an API around it, put a Stripe payments in front of it and problem solved, and the reality is that, that the work of a game developer, the resources that you have available, the amount of compute and data is really, really different than, a research lab that's focused on AGI, especially at a DeepMind or OpenAI kind of scale. And so I think much of what I think that's very common to the two companies that I really personally find fascinating is this, how do you deliver AI that is useful, directable, productive, without without requiring expertise. You have to have 10 ML PhDs or, tens of thousands of concurrent game instances. And so to me, that's like actually the more interesting story is like that fundamental, the invisible part of like shaping your tech and finding a path that allows you to deliver that value in a way that's usable, useful, and economical.
All right, guys. Well, as always, friends, if you've got feedback or ideas, hit me up at Alexandra@Navic.co. I'm always open. And with that, we're out. Nathan and Christoffer, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been great. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@navic.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Navic has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.navic.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Navic Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.navic.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.